So my name is Ghee Bowman, and I am currently a PhD student at Exeter University, and I'm going to tell you about a project that I was involved with a few years ago as an example of a black and minority history project that worked fairly well, I think. So the title of the presentation is Telling Stories Together, How We Made a Hidden History Project That Worked. There is the portrait of the African from the museum in Exeter again, and there's the website address, tellingourstories.exeter.org.uk. So the project was called Telling Our Stories, Finding Our Roots, and often referred to as TOS4. So if you hear me or someone else saying TOS4, then you know that's what we're talking about. And it was a community-led project looking at Exeter's multicultural history. And it lasted for a year and a half. So we started in the summer of 2012 and finished in December 2013. So it's nearly 3 years now since we finished. And it was based at the Global Centre in Exeter. And that's the photo there of the Global Centre, which is part of the Exeter Community Centre on St. David's Hill. So where did it come from, this project? Maybe I'll take the microphone off. How about that? Yeah, okay. I might sing you a song later if you're lucky. I might. So Exeter, sometimes known as the last white homeland. In fact, that was a comment that we got from one of the evaluations, and a sense that, you know, in contrast with what Steve just been talking about, you know, that the kids in the Exeter classrooms are not black at all. They're not mixed at all. You know, they're all very white. And so that was the kind of big sort of context with which we were dealing. So we got involved in a process, the collaborative planning process that took 2 years, building very much on personal experiences as cultural champions. So cultural champions are people who are from minority ethnic communities who we trained to go into classrooms and to work in other situations and share their experience, share their culture, share their background with children in the classroom. And we've been doing that in Exeter and Devon for quite a long time. So we were building on that experience. And this was a collaborative project between the Global Centre and the museum, the Royal Albert Memorial Museum, and the City Council and the university. So it was very much about bringing people together. And our funding was from the Heritage Lottery Fund. So Kelly, who was here yesterday, was very much part of the process of helping us to find the funding for that. And we got £49,000, which was what we needed to make it work. What we did. So it's a research project with a difference. We had, and it really, the core of it was we had this multicultural team of volunteers. So there were 23 of them. Put your hand up if you were part of that team. Yeah, excellent. Great to have people here today. Unfortunately, Sandhya can't be here today. She's, well, hopefully we'll see her in a bit of video later, but she was the other kind of core person. So 23 volunteers, the majority of whom were from BME backgrounds. And we did training, and that was really important. So we had training in storytelling. We had training in research in interviews and archives. So we went into the archive, the Devon Record Office, we went into the Royal Albert Memorial Museum, and we had training in interviews from Marilyn, who was the Devon corresponding person for the Oral History Society. And then we went ahead and did archival research and oral history interviews. So these kind of two approaches to research, which I find kind of really go together well and complement each other. We had regular team meetings, and we had 2 storytelling events, which were really a very much important part of the output, if you like, of the sharing what we'd learnt. And we developed a guided tour. So this photo, which we also saw yesterday, is one of our stations on the guided tour. And it's the first Chinese restaurant in Exeter, which opened in 1958. We developed a website, and we developed schools activities. So those were the outputs. And we had some celebrations. We had some parties along the way. So some of the stories that we found, and I would love to tell you these stories, but we don't have time. So if you want to grab me in the break and ask me to tell you, I'd be very happy to, because this was really an important part of the way that we did it, was a storytelling approach. So we've already heard about this one from Lucy. This is the 1522 military survey of Exeter, when 5% of the population were aliens, and that's the original document there that you can find still in the Devon Record Office. Joseph Pitts. A little-known story, an almost completely unknown story. Joseph Pitts, an Exeter resident who, I won't tell you what he did because you're going to have to come and ask me, but he had an extraordinary journey, an Exeter man who left the shores of Exeter in the 1670s. Mrs. Hendy, she became, to some extent, our poster girl for the project. She was born in Cornwall in 1917. Her father was probably Jamaican. Her mother was white Cornish. She moved to Exeter in 1939 and spent the rest of her life there, and did a great interview not with one of us, but we inherited the interview. We inherited the transcript of the interview, and it's a lovely story about her, particularly her time during the Second World War living in Exeter. And similarly, Madame Josephine, who I don't yet have a photo of, Madame Josephine was a herbalist who lived in Exeter in the middle of the 20th century and had a shop where she sold herbal remedies and was something of a, I don't know, something of a kind of witch figure, it seems, to the local children. And her daughter went on to act in the film Cry the Beloved Country in the 1950s with Sidney Poitier. The stories of Chinese Exeter. Two of our researchers were Chinese, and they uncovered some really interesting stuff about the Law family, who we just saw in the photo, but also a boy in 1911, a Chinese boy, 14-year-old boy in the census, who was in Exeter at school. So his family had sent him around the world to Exeter to go to school. Why, we don't know, but there he is in the census. A tantalizing glimpse of an interesting story. George Walker was one of the interviews, one of the last interviews that I did for the project. A wonderful chap who told stories about Exeter in the war, and French troops who came through, black GIs and white GIs, American soldiers who were there, Polish airmen, and the kind of this, painting a picture of this multiculture that existed for a short time there, as it existed throughout the country. But the country was very different in that period during the war. The website. I'm going to just show you a couple of things on the website. So that's the homepage, and I'm just going to take you to the timeline. So the timeline is the kind of backbone of the website, really, and it starts with the Romans arriving in Exeter and establishing the city. And of course, the Romans were not just Italians, people from Italy. They were from around the Roman Empire. So they were from North Africa, they were from the Levant, the Middle East, they were from Asia Minor, they were from across South and Southern and Western Europe. And Exeter was a multicultural city, therefore, from its inception, from the beginning. And that's kind of one of the key points that we make on the guided tour and elsewhere as well. Going through the Dark Ages, the story of St. Sidwell, the Vikings, the medieval Jewish population in Exeter. There's Henry VIII, and there's the story of the aliens, the 66 aliens, John Hawkins, Pocahontas. Did Pocahontas come to Exeter? She certainly came to Plymouth. She landed here in 1616 and went up to London. I'm not sure whether she actually stopped in Exeter. And so forth. We go through the slave trade. There's the portrait of the African into the 19th century, and so on. Some great. This is one of my favorite stories. 1929 was the peak year for French onion sellers. Who remembers the French onion sellers? Put your hand up. Yeah. They used to come across in large amounts from Brittany with their pink onions, their special pink onions, and they would set up little kind of warehouses in parts of the southwest, and then they would cycle literally with a beret and a bicycle and onions on the handlebars, and they would cycle around the farms and sell the sellers. Extraordinary. There's Mrs. Hendy, and so we go on up until the present day. So the mosque, there's the purpose-built mosque, and so on. So an enormous amount of stories, and that page kind of brings them together. We've got the audio interviews. So here you'll find lots and lots of interviews that we made with people. Aisha, for example, who runs the Dinosaur Cafe in Exeter. We interviewed Aisha and her husband Abdullah, and Who else did we interview that you would, anyway, I haven't got time to really play any of these, but some videos, lots of lovely photos. Here are our volunteers. There they are. Great group of people. Here is our wonderful volunteer team. This was at the storytelling event at the museum. And as you can see, quite a mixed group in terms of age as well as in terms of ethnicity. The heart of the project. So in terms of what difference it made, I mean, there was a great impact on us. Hector, one of our volunteers, did his dissertation, his undergraduate dissertation on it. David wrote some very powerful and moving poems that you'll find on the website. He was very moved by, and the impact on him was considerable. Crystal, who's an African American, did a lot of work on black GIs in Exeter, and has since, and one of the videos is about that, and has since followed that work up. And Miranda, who was our administrator, made a very strong reconnection with her Jamaican heritage. There was a strong sense that we learned from each other, and also that those bonds continue, and I think that's a really important part of it. We made bonds, interpersonal bonds, and institutional, organizational bonds that continue now. This photo, and it changed my life. I mean, this is a photo that I found from a book called Devon during the war, Devon at War, from the Second World War. And this photo of these Indian soldiers, I took this as a starting point, did some research, did a master's, and I'm now doing a PhD all about the people who are in this soldier, or in this photo, which I will tell you about at great length if you grab me in a break. In terms of the legacy, there is the website, which continues to receive a lot of visits. The guided tours, I still do the guided tours on a regular basis. So if you'd like to come on if you'd like to book me for a guided tour of Exeter's multicultural history, I'd be very happy to do that. Work in schools and universities. So we're doing some work in February with the geography department at the university. We've got a lot of local media coverage. The conference on the legacy of British slavery that we talked about was kind of related to the project. And one of my proudest moments, I was called a traitor to the race by someone who calls himself the Corsham Crusader, who's a far-right activist on a website. So I'm really proud about that. That's how I'm seen by the far-right. And Exeter Together. I don't know if you know that in November 2013, the English Defence League, they're certainly not defending me, marched in Exeter, and that we put up a march in opposition, and people who were involved in the project were very much involved in that. So there's Sandhya in that photo as well. How am I doing for time? I've still got a bit of time. Here's some of the comments we received. It's been one of the best things I've ever done, better than my degree. I was not aware of the degree of racial prejudice which my fellow volunteers may have experienced. One volunteer said the project literally changed his life. This is from an audience member. Moving, funny, insightful, a brilliant evening that took me on journeys into the corners of Exeter I didn't know existed. And a museum volunteer said the Ganesh statue has given meaning, the Ganesh story has given meaning to the museum statue. It's very interesting. This is from Nicola Thomas at the university, who was sort of one of our kind of advisors. She said, TOTS4 team members developed and maintained a safe, supported environment to undertake a project that gently, purposefully, and radically challenged Exeter as a taken-for-granted white space. The participatory, research-led approach demonstrated that Exeter has always been a city which has seen people from across the world walk through the city gates. TOS4 also demonstrated that although a project might be time-limited, it can have a powerful legacy. The community, built through TOS4, continues to disrupt, support, and challenge the city of Exeter to continue to be a place where diverse communities can thrive. So I like that we, in terms of the uniqueness, the way I'm putting it here, the approach was not academic but not anti-academic. So I think that worked for us. You know, we had two academics involved. I'm just going to skip through this and actually onto this, what I call the top tips. So if you're thinking about doing something similar, this is things that we learned. Do the planning before you submit the application. Before the application form. Kelly said that was an important part of it, that we'd thought a lot of it through. It took us 2 years on the planning. And budget carefully. Network, network, network. This project wouldn't have worked without us working with people that we knew, bringing people in, thinking about the interlocking circles and how we could bring other people in. Keep the skills in-house if you can. Use the skills that you have. That reduces costs and increases accountability. But also, and one of those is experience. That's probably one of my key things in retrospect, is if you've got experienced group facilitators, if you can find experienced group facilitators, use them. If you're working with large groups of people, if you're working with mixed groups of people, then you really need to have people who know how to do that. And also build the skills, work on the skills. We did a lot of skills development that really made a big difference. Put the hours in. Takes a lot of time. And build in fun and celebration. It wouldn't have worked if we hadn't enjoyed ourselves. That's what kept the volunteers coming back. That's what kept people coming to the storytelling events and the other events. So make it fun. Okay, were these stories hidden? This is my kind of response to the question of hidden stories, hidden histories. Were they, and here's some other words: forgotten, unremembered, lost, erased, effaced, marginal, forbidden. So remember that, of course, power is an important part of that. The rulers, the dominant groups, their stories are never hidden. However, I would like to suggest that most of these stories were known beforehand, at least by some people. So what we did was we brought them together around a common focus. So I would suggest that these stories were unfocused. They weren't unknown, they weren't hidden, they were unfocused. There was something about the project which was about bringing a focus. Not quite a lens, but something about bringing a focus, bringing things together, putting things together on the spine of that timeline. You know, the focus of Exeter, the focus of multicultural history was a very simple, if you like, focus, but it really worked, I think. Right, there's our volunteers. That's it. Thank you very much.